Okay, look, I have this hot take. It's kind of controversial, but it's about art materials. The only wasted paint is what's left in the tube. The only wasted paint is what you don't use to try to make art, whether it's good or bad or ugly. This is brushwork. I hear this excuse a lot, that I don't want to waste my good art materials, and it just rubs me the wrong way. I don't want to use the good art materials. I don't want to use the great colored pencils that I have. I don't want to use the good paint I have because I'm still a beginner, or I don't have good enough ideas for the paint, or I don't have blah, 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 blah. You know, you hear the excuses that happen when people say, I don't want to make these pieces of art because I don't want to waste my materials. As if trying to make art causes materials to be wasted. The only wasted paint is what's not being used in this itty bitty little tube of paint, and it stays here and it ages and eventually sometimes goes bad. Today my goal is to encourage you to use your fancy art materials, to use up all those beautiful paints you have that you've never touched in the fear of wasting it, to open up that brand new sketchbook and use it. Use your art materials. When you have all these beautiful supplies and they just stay in your art studio or your desk or wherever your art making space is, and they're just pristine in their little boxes and they're very pretty, you're not making art, you're collecting art materials. And that's so sad. I want you to make art. And don't you want to make art? That's why you bought those things in the first place. That's why they were given to you, perhaps. If you let these materials just stay in your boxes, if you let your paint stay in the tubes, that's the wasted paint. That's the wasted color. And that's the wasted art material. When you don't use your fancy paints and your fancy brushes and your fancy little color pencils, your art studio becomes a landfill. That's what's wasted. That's the wasted paint. Use the good colors. Now, beyond just lecturing you about not using your colors, I'm going to tell you why you should be using your nicer things. When you are a student, when you're a beginner, you're usually given a lot of basic Crayola grade art materials, and they have their time and they have their purpose. But if you stick with them too long, you're going to start developing habits that cannot transfer to the nicer material. Say you're using a number 2 pencil and you're doing a graphite drawing and you've gotten some shading down, but it's not quite giving you the darkness you need, and the marks you're making are not really fine enough. That's when it's time to upgrade to the artist grade pencils. That's when it's time to start using the full range between 8H and 8B and learning the expansive value that can happen when you use these nicer materials. Graphite pencils are an easy example, and they're easy to go into the artist grade types because the highest level 4H pencil you can get is probably at most $3. But with paints, it can be a little bit more frustrating. I understand not wanting to use your really nice cerulean paint. I can understand when it costs $30, $40 a tube of paint that you don't want to waste the color. Putting money into these materials, it feels like, okay, they're valuable. I don't want to make a painting that I hate and then having had just wasted the money. But I want you to change the way you think about wasting and about value and about your art supplies in general. When you pull out your cerulean color and you pour out a dollop of it on your palette, and you start to mix it in, even just putting the dollop of paint on your palette makes buying that color worthwhile. Even if you let it dry on the palette, it's still not wasted, because what you've done is taken a step towards making art, and that is invaluable. Now let's say you've poured it out onto your palette, and you've mixed the color, and you've started making a painting, and you hate the painting. It's still worth it. You have not wasted paint because you have learned something from that color. Its purpose was to give you experience on making art. When you use your fancy materials, even if the results are not great, you are learning about the materials, which is the process of making art, which is learning and creating, which is beautiful, right? That's the purpose. That's what that amount of money that went into that tube of paint has paid for. Brilliant. Because now you've learned something from that last tube of paint, and it is teaching you something for the next painting, which will probably, almost definitely be better. You've learned lessons. You've learned what the mistakes were. You've learned about the composition, the light, the tone, the values, whatever. And now you can carry it over to the next painting. I see a lot of artists who stay in the student grade colors way too long. When you stay in your student grade colors, when you stay in your color pencils that are student grade, they're Crayolas, and you haven't moved up to even to like Prismacolors, you are staying in limitation. And that is really, it's hard to break out of if you don't know what the professional grade colors can do. When you have a student grade color, let's say it's a cadmium, it's probably a hue. The brightness and the intensity is very different than the professional grade. The professional grade is going to have a punch to it. It's going to have an impact. The differences of pigment is something that you're going to have to relearn. And that can be frustrating if you've stuck with the student grades for way too long. When you have the full range of color that comes with the professional grade materials, when you have the ability to make not pink, but a true vibrant red, that ability is going to unlock your artistic potential. And don't you want that? When you stay in the student grade, when you resist the fancy colors, you are staying within limitation and you're not allowing yourself, you're not even giving yourself the ability to take your ideas and make them even better because there's a ceiling to it. With the student grade pigments, they're good for learning the very basics, but you should move into the fancy paints as quickly as you can. You should move into the fancy colors. You should move into the fancy graphites. You should take all of the abilities that you've already purchased if you have these fancy colors and use them. When you don't use them, you are limiting yourself, you are limiting your budgets, and you're limiting what you can make. Don't let your studio be a landfill. Take the materials you have and use the fancy stuff. Now, when you go into your professional grade materials, it's going to be a learning curve. You're going to have to learn the new intensity of these pigments, and they're going to behave differently, which is another arc of learning before you're going to get the really beautiful, wonderful pieces of art that you want to make. And that's okay. It takes time, which is why you should move into it sooner than later. Learning these new materials without the handicap of the student grade materials sooner will get you to where you want to go sooner with your artwork. I feel like this lesson leads into other places in your life also. Have you ever gone to your parents' house and seen fancy chocolate in the freezer and they're saving it for a special day? Have you ever gone to a friend's house and they have this amazing tea that they got from their travels in India and they've been saving it, but when you actually open up the canister, you've realized it's expired because they've saved it for 5 years? Your materials can expire too, and the quality of the materials can get ruined by unuse. This especially happens with markers and inks. You should be very careful about using up your materials in time before they expire, because what's worse than saving your materials for a day that when it's like off in the future and you're like, I'm ready to use the materials, and then you go to do them and then you can't use them because the marker is dried up and the ink isn't working and the oil paint that your grandmother had for 70 years that she gave to you has totally like clumped up and gotten weird and grainy, and then you can't make anything with it. When you don't use these nicer materials and you just let them rot in your studio, your patience for waiting until the right time, it doesn't pay out even a little bit. If you've got the fear that you might mess up your nice brushes, that you might mess up your beautiful palette of watercolors, that's a whole different fear to think about. Messing up your materials is something that happens on occasion. And it happens with everything else in your life where you might not know how to take care of something and therefore you will ruin it and then you have to rebuy it later, right? This is something that you can prevent by simply doing a little bit of research. If you're like, I don't want to ruin this beautiful pan of watercolor paints I have, you can look up how to keep a clean watercolor pan set here on YouTube. You can look it up, do some research. If you're afraid of ruining your nice brushes because you don't know how to clean them properly, look up a tutorial. Look up something that tells you exactly how to do it and then try. And I guarantee you, if you mess up one thing, you will not do it a second time because you will learn, oh, that's what not to do. I have messed up many brushes in my lifetime here as a professional artist here on YouTube, and it's okay. If I mess one up, then it's messed up and I use it for a different purpose. Maybe it's not going to give me the fine line that I want, but maybe I can use it as a scrubbing brush for something else in the future. And I think there's a real value about learning how to fix things that releases you from the confines of, I don't want to mess the thing up. There are practices you can do to maintain the quality of your objects. Say you're like, okay, I've got oil paints and I don't want it to dry up, so you make sure that you put a cap on it every single day. If you need to wash your brushes and they're oil painting brushes, you use a proper soap and you get out as much material as you can from the brush and then you wash them. and you research things and you look it up correctly, and there you go. I have a couple steps for you today that I think will encourage you to use the nicer materials. And that is something that, and these are things that I've done in my own studio where I'm like, oh, I have all these beautiful colored pencils, but they're in a box. I'm probably not going to use them. No, instead, I'm going to reach for the ones that are like in my little jar that I have. Let me show you. Like, am I going to use the pencils that are in the beautiful box that's off in the corner, or am I going to use the ones that are easy to reach in the jar here that I have on my desk at all times? I'm going to reach for these. So if you want to be using your nice materials more, you need to pull them out. Take them out of their packaging. If you want to save the packaging because it's beautiful, put the packaging somewhere else. But in the meantime, get all your beautiful pencils and put them in the box. Take out the student grade ones. You don't need this tri-colored piece here. It's actually 4 different colors. I'm not going to use this all the time. It's student grade. It's not very good quality. It's fun and interesting, so it might stay in the box. But you know what? I'd rather have the Prismacolors in here than the Crayolas. You know what I'm saying? Are you picking up what I'm putting down? If you're transitioning between your student grade materials and you want to go into your nice fancy pieces, your professional grade, artist grade materials, I recommend removing the student grade things from your most easily accessed spot and putting your nicer stuff where you can see it. Like, put it out. Put it out. Put your fancy tea on the counter with your tea set and not hidden away for special days. When you put out your nice pencils and you put out your nice markers and you make them easy to grab and something that you see all the time, you're more likely to go for it. And when you put things that are student grade in a box somewhere, you're not going to go for those first because they're harder to get to. When you add convenience and then also add restriction, you'd be more inclined to go for the nicer material. The only wasted paint is what's left in the tube. You're not wasting paint when you make a bad painting. You're learning. Someone's not wasting paint when they make a painting that you don't like. They're making their own art and their own expression, and it's none of your business, right? If you see art and you're just like, I could do that, you should try it with your nice paint. Try and make your art with your nicer materials. Pull out the brand new sketchbook and you're like, I don't want to ruin the sketchbook or the new journal. A trick I love here is just to flip the first page over and start on page 2, and you can always like decorate the first page later if you want, but you just start. And you're like, I don't want to mess up the drawing. Mess it up. Mess up the drawing, mess up the art, mess up your nice materials. You can always get more later. Having a scarcity mindset around your art materials will limit what you create, and it'll limit how much you grow, and it'll limit what you produce. The scarcity mindset around art materials is so unfortunate because I think it inhibits you from making art and actually fulfilling your ideas. There's something that beginners do, which is they have these great ideas for art pieces and they're so excited to make them, and they don't have the skills to get there quite yet. And so they try to make it and it doesn't live up to their expectations, and they're either disappointed or distraught and they stop. Being a student of art means using up materials. It means using materials so that you can learn to actually execute the ideas that you have. When you're starting out, you have to train your hand, you have to train your eye, you have to train the way you think, and that means going through art materials and using them up. Don't be stingy with how much paint you pour on the canvas. Don't be stingy about what brushes you use. Don't be stingy with how many color pencils you have. If you have the hunger and the drive for making art, you're going to be able to replenish your stores of materials if you need to in the future. Like, it's the universe is going to conspire to make this happen. I don't know if you believe in the universe or not. It doesn't matter. But when you have the intention of making art, you're going to bring in opportunities to get more materials. It'll become a priority for you, and that's beautiful. But you have to start by actually saying, I'm allowed to use these fancy materials because I can make fancy art with them. You got to change your mindset. So use up your fancy materials and stop calling them fancy. They're just art materials. Use your colors so that they can serve you and not rot away on your shelves. If you have other doubts around making art that you want me to give you a pep talk about, I would love to make those. Will you put them in the comments for me so I can read them and maybe respond to some of them? They're interesting to me as someone who makes art all the time, and I would love to help encourage you to create. I've got a challenge for you and for using your fancy art materials. I want you to make a drawing or a painting. It can be little every day for a week. 7 days of making art using your fancy art materials. And I want you to post it to my Discord. The Discord is the Arts and Crafts Table. It is a community for artists who want to improve their skills and tune to their creative mindsets and talk about art theories. It's really fun. It's a great community. And I want you to join us and use your fancy materials and show us what you make. Good or bad or ugly, no matter what it is. If you mess up, you mess up. You're going to find encouragement here on this Discord channel. I think it'd be really fun. There's a link to it in the description. And you could join us. You could make art. You could use the fancy stuff. You could be a fancy artist. You just got to take the leap. I believe in you. You got this, all right? Friends of ours, it's nice to see you. Thanks for hanging out today for Brushwork Podcast. My name is Stephanie Scott. I can be found on Instagram and on my website and blah, 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 blah. Those links are in the descriptions. Whatever. You know this. You know how to do this. All right. Till next time. I'll see you later. Bye. What else do I have to say to get you to make some art? I want to see it. The people need it. They need your art. Can you get your fancy ceruleans and your fancy cadmiums and just paint me a picture already? Time's ticking.